Hey everybody, welcome to the inaugural first episode of In Darkness a Light Still Shines. We are excited to be here. I am Barry Feeker, Executive Director of the Topeka Rescue Mission in Freedom Now, USA.
And I'm Jessica Hossman. I'm the Senior Director of Trauma-Based Initiatives and the Children's Palace at the Topeka Rescue Mission.
So if you are wondering why we've started a podcast, it's very simple. Is that in this day and age, we have multiple ways of receiving information. I know when I was a kid, there were two newspapers that showed up on the driveway, the morning and the evening newspaper, and the one or two television stations is how you would get your news. In the evening, probably that was it. As we've transitioned over many, many years, we have seen the internet open up the door to be able to communicate in so many different ways. For 66 years, the Topeka Rescue Mission has been around, and for all that time, we've sent out a monthly newsletter that has been able to inform folks of what we're doing at the Rescue Mission. It's something that looks like this. If you are a contributor to the Rescue Mission, you saw the June newsletter that talked about the change that we're making in regards to still sending out a newsletter, but it's going to be abbreviated. And we are going to then have information that's going to be shared in a much broader way to engage and inspire and to equip our community to be able to reach out to those who are in need.
Yeah, what I really like about doing it in this video format is any of you ever get a text message and you're not quite sure what the tone was intended behind the person that was sending that message. And there's opportunity when you're reading something to not quite understand and get the real feeling behind it. And so I think that when we're talking and as we're sharing different stories, it's really going to help our listeners to be pulled into the story a little bit more maybe than what the traditional newsletter might have been able to do.
This will be a weekly podcast as well. And so where the newsletter comes out once a month, and it's about 6 weeks in advance that we have to write it because of printing times and those kind of things, this is going to be very contemporary. But also we're going to base it around the book In Darkness a Light Still Shines. So each time that we talk about this, we're going to unpack a story, and we'll share our first story today. And then after that story is shared, we're going to be able to talk about what does that really mean. And we're hoping that this will not only inform you, but will also inspire you. And so, Jessica, I'm excited about what we're getting ready to do.
I'm excited too.
So we're going to unpack the first story. It's called The Drunk in the Street. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
This production is hosted by Topeka Rescue Mission Ministries, bringing help and hope through faith with its sleeves rolled up. Thank you to Furniture Mall of Kansas for sponsoring the In Darkness a Light Still Shines video podcast. We appreciate your support.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Barry, you mentioned that you're going to share with us about a drunk in the street, and I'm just really excited to hear this in your words.
Yeah, Jessica, this is chapter 1. It was actually my first day at the Topeka Rescue Mission. It was April 21st of 1986. Just really to kind of set the stage of this, it didn't look anything like Topeka Rescue Mission looks like today. We were in an old building that was literally leaning to the north, and it was my first day at the Rescue Mission. I'd never been in the building before. Now I'm the executive director walking in. I got a coat and tie on. I think I'm going to impress people, and it was about 15 to 20 homeless folks and me. They'd been without a director for a number of months, and so that was the stage. But also what was interesting as I walked into the building, there was this beautiful mural on the side of the wall in this very narrow hallway with a red carpet that hadn't been vacuumed probably 20 years. And it was a mural of the Last Supper, and it was amazing. It was beautiful. A street artist had designed it. But I noticed as I looked very closely as I was walking by this very long mural with the Lord's Supper, there was spaceships and there was Bugs Bunny and Bullwinkle and some other stuff on there. And I thought, well, it's not quite the one I remember in the Bible. But anyway, found out that she was a great artist. She suffered from mental illness, and she came to the mission off and on. So it was just kind of an understanding that this is where I was walking into. But as I walked up to the front desk, there was this very large desk, and there was a little guy sitting behind the desk. His name was Mr. Betts, and he had no hair. He was very thin. He had big old round wire rim glasses, and he was sitting in this leather chair that had been donated, I'm sure, that was put together with gray duct tape. And so it was just held together, and I came over to Mr. Betts, and I said, "Hey, I'm Barry," and he says, "I know who you are." like a real warm welcome. He had a big old cigar hanging out of his mouth, I remember that. And I said, where do I go? What do I do? And he said, your office is around the corner. There's a set of keys on the desk. What I'd recommend is you go in there and you can leave and go home at 5 o'clock. He didn't tell me to do anything else. It was just pretty much stay in your office. So I went in there and I didn't know what to do, and I looked around the mission a little bit and was still trying to figure it all out. Again, my first day, I knew that probably wearing a coat and tie wasn't the best thing to do in a homeless shelter when it's mainly just homeless folks. One thing that was interesting, there was also a big black leather chair that was held together with gray duct tape. I sat down in it and kind of twiddled my thumbs, looked at my keys. The phone didn't ring until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And the phone rang, and it was someone down the street on North Kansas Avenue. And they said, you the director? And I said, yes. Well, you need to do something about the drunks in North Topeka. As a matter of fact, there's one coming your way walking down the street right now to the mission, and his pants are down around his ankles. And so you need to do something. I thought, oh boy, here we go. So I walked out onto Kansas Avenue at 600 North Kansas. And sure enough, middle of the day, there was this guy that was shuffling down the street over the railroad tracks, headed towards the mission, and sure enough, his trousers were hanging down around his ankles. And he was just shuffling along, and of course, I'm standing out there a little bit trying to wonder, what am I to do with this? And the 15 to 20 homeless people gathered around me at that point, like, hey, you're the new guy in town. What are you going to do about this? And as the gentleman came up closer to me, I could see that maybe he wasn't drunk. Maybe he was just old. And he'd been out in the sun for a while. You could tell that he'd had a sunburn. And he didn't look too good. He looked very thin, very frail. And so as I was standing on the sidewalk and he was down in the street, and he came up to the curb, and I'll never forget, he looked up into my face and he stretched his hand out like this, like to grab a hold of my hand. And so I did. And he kind of pulled, and I pulled him up on the sidewalk. And I said to him, do you need a place to stay? And he goes, no, I'm fine. I said, are you hungry? He said, no, I'm good. I said, are you thirsty? And he said, yes, I am really thirsty. And I said, could somebody get some water? I didn't even know where the kitchen was at this point. First day on the job. And so I said, is there anything else I can do for you? And he said, yes, I need a belt. I said, you need a what? He said, I need a belt. And he said, I can't keep my pants up. They've fallen down. And so I said to the guys around there, I said, do we have a belt? And they said, we'll go find one. And so as somebody's getting a belt somewhere in the old rescue mission, he drank about 5 glasses of water, just poured those glasses of water down. He was so thirsty. And then somebody brought me a belt, handed it to me, and I handed it to him, and he said, I'm sorry. I can't bend over. I broke my back in a construction accident many years ago. And he said, I'm having a really bad day. I could see why his pants wouldn't stay up, is because he was so thin. And when he shared this with me, he asked me this, would you mind putting this belt on me and helping me with my pants? So I'm in a dilemma here. I'm the director. I've got a coat and tie on. First day on the job. Maybe I need to tell somebody else to do this to show I'm a director. Or maybe I need to ask, what would Jesus do? Would he be the guy to kneel down on the ground, help this man with his pants up, and put that belt around him? And so I'm glad I made the right decision. I went ahead and I knelt down. Everybody's looking at me, very curious if I'm going to do the right thing, to see if I'm going to assert my power and authority or my position, or I'm going to humble myself. I think I'd lost the coat and tie by this time. And so I knelt down, helped the man up with his pants, cinched it around him. And I said, is there anything else I can do for you? And he said, no, I'm good. I said, are you sure? He said, no, I'm good. He reached his hand down and grabbed a hold of my hand like this. And he said, thank you. God bless you. He stepped off the curb and he shuffled away, and I never saw him again. Wow. What that taught me that day was that whoever comes through the doors of the Topeka Rescue Mission, I better be careful not to judge them. Right. I better be careful not to decide who they are or why they're here, right, or what their story is. And I oftentimes don't get to hear the stories. I remember going home that night, and I remember my little girls coming up to me and saying, Daddy, tell us what you did the first day on your job. And I said, well, I had an interesting day. They said, what'd you do? I said, I gave a guy a belt. And they were kind of unimpressed with that. But all these years, that's been the precedent for the Topeka Rescue Mission in this community. So when we come back, we're going to talk about how we judge others and how God really looks at those who come across our path, whether they be a homeless person or somebody in our neighborhood or somebody maybe at our work, our school, or our church, and maybe how God sees thus the way we really are. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
If you would like to support Topeka Rescue Mission Ministries, text TRM Give to 77977 and start giving today.
Welcome back to In Darkness a Light Still Shines. We've just talked about how people look at individuals and really don't know everything that they need to know about, and we make judgments. We talked about a man that I met 33 years ago who was thought to be a drunk in the street, but in fact, he was a man who had just had a broken back, and he was really challenged. So, Jessica, this is just really exciting. This is our first podcast to be able to unpack stories out of In Darkness a Light Still Shines book. And now what we want to do is we want to engage and just really talk about the lessons that we learn here. I know that you have been at the rescue mission for about 10 years, and prior to that time you worked in Pennsylvania in a rescue mission there, and you've had a number of trips to Africa and Mozambique and have served on the field there. What's the difference in the way we look at people here, if there is any, in regards to the United States and how we look at the poor here and how people maybe look at the poor in Africa?
Sure. I think that judgment, unfortunately, it's kind of a universal thing. I think that everywhere that I have visited, whether it was serving on a mission field or working, just exploring the world, I feel like, unfortunately, that's just the culture that we live in today. I think that it seems like it's the norm to pass those judgments, and you might be in a third world African nation, and you're still, even amongst the rural poor, you're still going to have those misperceptions that exist from one village to another, from one missionary team to another. And I feel like that shouldn't be our norm, especially in the church. I think that we have an opportunity to be an example. That experience that you had on your first day of work at the rescue mission, your first day of ministry in a homeless shelter, I think it's really significant because I've known you now for 10 years, and I feel like you really walk in that spirit of humility. And it was almost like God wanted you to know right from the start, this is how you're going to serve. You're going to serve from this place of humility, from this place where you're on the ground, essentially. You're lower than this person that I've given you to serve. As you were putting on that man's belt, I can almost envision you looking up to him and lacing around his waist, almost like I would for my child. And I think that that's God's desire for all of us, that regardless of whether we're prominent business owners or whether we're missionaries on the field or anything in between, I feel like God wants us to serve from that place of humility and recognizing that these folks around us, I'm not better than them, but in a sense, they're actually better than me. And what do I have to learn from them and from their lives? And I feel like maybe just share a little bit about what God has done in these past 33 years from that experience to really shape the way that you have served, not only at the rescue mission, but within our community.
Yeah, when we talk about humility, that is not common to the way that we do things normally. We look at our country right now. There's a lot of animosity between different systems of belief, systems of political. There seems to be just this kind of fight for survival, and it's wrapped up in pride that our team has to win. Our way is the right way. And that doesn't serve to help anybody. One of the things I've learned over the years is that when somebody's standing in a food line and they're waiting to get something for dinner tonight, they're there because they need to be there. They don't generally stand in line for 15 minutes to an hour to get something to eat at a homeless shelter unless they're hungry.
Right.
Okay? So one of the things that they really don't care about is what our politics are.
Right.
They don't really care what our religion is.
Right.
They just want to make sure that the people in the kitchen are getting along,
Right.
and that they're here to serve because they're in desperate need right now.
Right.
And I think that what we learn is that when we look at the world system and how people are conducting themselves, we're very challenged and very grieved. And I think one of the things I've learned over the years is I can fall right into that as well.
Sure.
When we've had 50 to 60,000 people stay at the rescue mission in my time here. That's a lot of different people with a lot of different situations that they've come in. And I would love to say every single one of them I viewed just like I viewed the man who walked up on the sidewalk that day. I would love to say that I haven't been tempted to be judgmental or to think about somebody who we call the frequent flyer who comes into our homeless shelter, our services over and over again. But God's pretty quick to correct me.
Yeah.
He really is.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think that there's a lot of individuals who have been in the helping field for a long time, or maybe just in their specific line of trade or whatever for a very long time. So over that course of time, you get accustomed to seeing the same type of people. And again, that could be in corporate America, or it could be in homeless shelter, or anything in between. But you almost get desensitized to the people that you're encountering every day, to the point where it is easy to just settle into that place of either judgment or pride or misconception. And what are your thoughts on how to break free from that?
I think the reason that we judge others is it's safe for us.
Right.
If I can decide this is what you think, this is what your motives are, then I have predictability. And that way I'm in control. And so when we see somebody we don't understand, we don't feel totally in control, and we don't necessarily feel safe.
Sure.
And so what we are challenged to do is when we see somebody is to stop and really think and listen. It's just kind of like the whole issue of human trafficking.
Yeah.
You know, how many victims of human trafficking have been into the rescue mission over the years? Untold number of people who've been broken with that particular kind of atrocity that goes on.
Right.
It's when we stopped and we said, why does this particular individual use drugs all the time?
Right.
Why does this particular individual act erratically?
Right.
Why are they out of their mind? Why do they suffer from mental illness? Why are they sexually traumatized to the degree that they are? Are they a promiscuous, homeless drug addict?
Sure.
Or is there something that happened in their life
Right.
that is so traumatic that it created a system within them, and people came along who wanted to control them because they're vulnerable people and begin to use them for nefarious reasons. And so it's easier for me to say, no, they're just a prostitute.
Right.
Or they're just a homeless person, or they're just a drug addict, or in this case with the drunk in the street, no, he's just a drunk coming down the street. He's got his pants down around him. He doesn't even have enough sense to pull him up, until we stop and we ask the questions.
Right.
And so that's work. That takes more time, but it really is so fulfilling and so rewarding. And that man may have been blessed with a belt that day, but I was the guy who got blessed with a lesson. And those that were around me got a chance to get blessed too, because you can work in a homeless shelter, like you say, you can work with any kind of ministry, social services, wherever, and you can get so jaded and so hard.
Right.
You can be a missionary to Africa, and you can go over there and say, well, these people need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Sure.
Yes, there is a reason to help people to go up.
Right.
And to move forward. That's why in our ministries, in rescue ministries around the world, we have programs, we have education, we have training, we have opportunity. But we always must not fail to stop and ask, what's gone on in that person's life?
Right, exactly.
What happened when they were a little kid?
Sure. I think back to when I first started experiencing what it's like to get to know individuals that were homeless. I was in college and I lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, started doing street outreach once a week just as a volunteer. I'd go downtown Pittsburgh and go under the bridges and in the alleyways. And I remember the guy that I was teamed up with. His name was Fred. He was a Vietnam veteran who had been formerly homeless himself and living at that time in an SRO, which I'm not even sure those exist around here.
Single room occupancy, yes.
Single room occupancy.
Right.
And he told me early on, he said, the people that you're going to encounter have had most everything stripped away from them, but they all have a story, and there's no one reason why they're on the streets. Exactly. And he said, there's one thing that nobody can take away from them, and it's the one thing I want you to remember every time we go out on the streets. And he said the one thing that nobody can take away from them is their name and their identity. But that's the one thing that often gets overlooked, even when we see somebody panhandling and we get desensitized to that and we make assumptions because we know stories about the reasons why some people are doing it. And we forget that even behind that sign, or maybe behind that addiction, maybe behind that facade that we see on the outside, there's a name and there's a person behind those eyes that are looking back at us. And like you said, it's so easy to forget that. It's so easy to just look at that person as another grouped category of the homeless, the addicted, the whatever. Yeah, and forget that that was somebody's little boy. That is somebody's little girl. And just like we're looking at them through our eyes, they look at us through those same eyes. They have the same flesh, the same emotions. And I feel like if we can become more empathetic and understanding of every single person we encounter, that might be in Walmart, that might be in the grocery store, that might be at a city council meeting, it might be a meeting at the Capitol, it might be standing in the food line, in the missions cafeteria, but everywhere we go, every time we see somebody, if that judgment starts to rise up, if we can just look at them and realize they have a name, they're a person, they have a story, and if we're bold enough to step up and say, "Hi, I'm Jessica, what's your name?"
Exactly.
You know, people at the rescue mission, I love to ask, tell me your story. How did you end up here? A lot of times a voice has been stripped away, and that's not something that they get asked because people around them usually assume they already know the story. But just giving that opportunity to let them tell their hurts, their desires, their life, it makes all the difference in the world.
You know, one of the questions I've learned to ask, regardless of the group, whether they're homeless folks or whether they're in a corporate boardroom, is there is one question that we all ask. Doesn't matter what our income level is, doesn't matter what our experiences are. And that one question, I always ask, do you know what that question is? The number one question that you ask, everybody in the whole wide world asks.
How you doing?
And that is, do I matter?
Oh, do I matter?
Do I matter?
Yeah.
We all want to know if we matter in this life. And that is the big question mark. And unfortunately, due to circumstances, due to this broken world we're in, there are many people that don't think they matter anymore.
Right.
And the opportunity we have is to help people understand that they really do matter.
Yeah, and not just poor people, not just homeless people.
Absolutely, it's everybody. I don't care who you are. Yeah. If you're making a ton of money and you got a ton in the bank and you drive really fancy cars, you're still driving around going, do I matter? Right. And until you know who you are in God and how much He loves you in Jesus Christ, you really don't have the fullness of understanding of how much you matter. Right. And that's what's exciting, but that's still the universal question. Sure. There was a young man who started out in his ministry work here, and he's a missionary in the Philippines now. And as we were building the Children's Palace, he came back to visit with me. He's got children now and a beautiful wife from the Philippines. And he was telling me about this situation to where in the Philippines, in the area he lives in, there are homeless everywhere. And there are people that just don't even pay attention to him. Yeah. Matter of fact, he was talking about this man who was naked in the middle of the street, a busy street, and cars were just driving around this guy. Wow. And so he felt like God told him to go over to him. And he said the guy was sitting totally without clothes, sitting there, hair everywhere, just totally caked with dirt. And he was picking up rocks and stacking them on each other. And he tried to engage with him, and the guy was just totally ignoring him. He was totally out of his mind. He was totally mentally ill. And he couldn't engage with the guy. He was trying to get him into safety. Right. He had a church across the street that he was willing to take him to see if he could help. They could help. And so he kept trying to engage, and he said this question, what is your name? And the guy didn't pay attention. He said, what is your name? What is your name? And then he said to him, because he couldn't reveal his name, he didn't know his name, he said, I'm going to call you John. And the guy stopped and he looked up at him and he says, I'm John. Wow. He said, I'm John.
Wow.
I'm John. And he said he picked him up, and as he picked him up, the man embraced him right in the middle of the street and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed. He said he had never had so much mucus all over his whole clothes and everything. It totally saturated him because this man was so touched that somebody named him.
Right.
He brought him into the church, he said, and it took him about 30 to 40 minutes to get clothes on him. He hadn't had clothes on for so long. And he said the man looked at him and he says, I'm John.
Oh, wow.
And so your point about everybody's got a name.
Yeah.
Even if they don't know it, if we can recognize them and how powerful that was to this missionary, as well as a guy named John.
Right. It's amazing.
Yeah. And that's really what we're talking about here is that we learn lessons in life and we make a decision what to do with them or not do with them. We're afraid a lot of times to reach out to somebody who's in the streets or in a store or is wherever the case might be, maybe at work, and the person's sitting right next to us because we don't know their story very well. And so we may see what they're eating or what they're wearing or the tattoos or the rings hanging out their nose or whatever the case might be. And so we're going to say, that's who they are. And we don't know. We don't know. So we make a decision on who they are. The heart of God is that we would see people like he sees them. And he sees them with love. He sees them with empathy. He sees them knowing their story. He knows what happened when they were 1 year old, 3 years old, 10 years old. He knows what has led them up to the situation. And he has called many of us to be his representative, to go out and embrace individuals with love, to understand their name, and to validate them with their name, not necessarily all their behavior. Everybody walks in the rescue mission doesn't always have good behavior. That's one of the things that's a real challenge. Is there some people that do things that they really shouldn't do, and it's not healthy for them or anybody around them. We have to address those issues. But why do they act that way? What can we do? And so as we talk about these issues, and as we engage with our audience in regards to these particular issues, how as a community, and anybody who's watching this in the United States, and what's really cool about this, you could be watching anywhere in the world right now when we're talking about these issues, what can we do to engage together?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I think that a good takeaway is you don't have to work in some exciting ministry 40 hours a week or 80 hours a week, that your sole job is to reach out to people and help in a social service organization. This is for everybody. And this is a part of, I mean, just knowing our neighbors and recognizing that we're in this together. Even, I mean, you mentioned internationally. It's not that it's America versus the rest of the world. We're one body. We're in this together. And yes, people have things that they can learn from us. We can learn from the experience God allowed you to have your very first day of work. But I truly believe that every single person around us has something to give that we can learn from as well.
Everybody's got it.
If we look through those eyes and we're willing to get to know their story and be humble enough to be able to get down like you got down to help that man with lacing the belt around him, if we're willing to get ourselves in that position of humility and we're able and willing to stop elevating ourselves and start allowing others to be elevated up.
People ask me, why have you stayed in this work for 3 decades plus? And well, number one, I believe this is what I'm supposed to do. But number two, I have learned so much and have been ministered back to so much by people who are considered lower class than others because of the value that's in each one of those individuals. And so we're excited to be able to share with each of you what is happening in our experience at the Topeka Rescue Mission. And we just want to encourage you that we have an opportunity together to just reach out to people wherever they are, whatever their situation in life is, and take that chance, take that risk to not judge, but to understand, and understand everybody's got a name and everybody has value and that they really do matter, just like you do, just like I do, just like you do, Jessica. We all matter. And the benefit of that is that we have just such a stronger community, and we have a community that really teaches each other
Yeah.
and to engage with each other, to love like God loves us.
That's right.
And so we just want to say thank you for joining us on this first of our podcasts that will be aired weekly.
Yes.
And we're just excited to be able to do this, and we're going to continue to unfold stories. And hopefully what you have heard today is something that touched your heart. Because here's the deal. You matter too. You matter a lot.
Absolutely.
You are so valuable
Yes.
in this world. You are valuable to people that you don't even know how
That's
valuable you are.
That's right.
And just take a chance to reach out to your neighbor, reach out to somebody who's in front of you, volunteer at the rescue mission or some agency within the community or anywhere in the whole wide world, wherever you're watching, and reach out and see what God can do with you. And it's really not that hard to get down and help somebody up off the ground.
That's right.
And you will benefit from it. So we thank you for being with us, and we will see you next week on In Darkness, a Light Still Shines.
Dear Lord, I want to see through your eyes. Help me to cast all judgments and hurts aside as I go through my days. When I look in the mirror, Lord, help me to see gold. May that same treasure be found when I look into the eyes of others I see. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for joining us. Our goal is to inspire, inform, and equip you to engage in the community around you. Join us next week for another episode of In Darkness, a Light Still Shines.